Evening and welcome to tonight's Q&A session. My name is Bridget Barry and I coordinate Farming for Nature. Farming for Nature was set up to inspire and encourage farmers that farm or wish to farm more with nature. And one of the ways we do this is each year we find exemplary farmers that are doing great actions for nature across Ireland. And these are our Farming for Nature ambassadors. And this Q&A session is a great way to hear from these ambassadors, find out what their top tricks of the trade are, but also to give you inspiration and encourage you, hopefully, on your farm to do more for nature. So I will kickstart the session by asking our guest speakers a couple of questions. But if you have any questions for the farmers here, please put it into your chat box, which should be on the banner of the bottom of your screen, and we'll facilitate the questions as we go along. So on to tonight's event. We're delighted to welcome Kilkenny couple and Farming for Nature ambassadors Bryan and Gail Daniels. Bryan and Gail are dairy farmers on approximately 388 acres in the uplands of Kilkenny. We will learn tonight about how they've cut back on chemical usage to be more sustainable both in the pocket and on the farm. Bryan and Gail, welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. You have to unmute yourselves when you get a chance.
Very good evening. Sorry, apologies about any background noise.
We can't hear
a family farm.
Good. It's good to have the whole family involved. Good. Bryan, we might just start with you. Can you start and describe your own journey onto this farm or into farming?
Yeah, suppose I grew up. This is our family farm. Yeah, we're roughly 9 generations here. Go back long time. I'm the 5th generation of Daniels, but the Daniels married in and took over the tenancy. So this is part of what was Godalton College or Bessborough Estate. So yeah, we just grew up here. We've been up here a long time. When I was growing up, my father was quite a progressive farmer at the time. EU milk quotas captain in terms of what he could do with the dairy farm. One stage he milked 140 cows. When I came back, he was milking 90 cows. There was calf to beef, and there was a large contracting business with 9 tractors, cutting silage, ploughing, tilling, slurry, dung, the whole lot. So I took actually over the farm in '99. I went down to Godalton. I done my certificate in agriculture. And it was an April afternoon. I was getting ready to see what other studies I would do further. My father asked me a simple question of, what do you want to do? And I said, quite simply, I want to run a herd of dairy cows. So at the age of 19, I was given full management of the farm. So at the time, it was 260 acres, about 110 dairy cows at the time. We were grazing roughly 90 cattle every year and fattening them for beef, and the contracting was going as well. My own particular interest was, I grew up as a feral child, like my own in the background, out around the farm. My father was buying up ground at the time, and we had an amazing childhood of going wherever we wanted and doing whatever we wanted. But quite fortunate that there was a lot of the old boundaries that were never touched on the farm. So we had cover, we had woodlands, we had streams, and that's where I fell in love with the countryside and just enjoyed the dairy cows particularly, and that's where I focused in on. So over the years, we've just worked our way up. So today, Gail and myself, we're farming, actually we've gained another bit of ground this spring, so we're farming about 420 acres this year. There's about 250 cows out there milking at the moment. Slight little upset in our herd this year in terms of a TB outbreak. But we have a plan. We're going to get through that. So the plan is next year we'll milk about 270 again. We rear all our own replacements, and we have a small bit of beef on the side as well. So it's a British Frisian herd. We use a lot of Aberdeen Angus, use some Belgian Galloways for our own personal interest in our own beef. And we have a few alternative breeds then just as interest for the kids. So there's a couple of Vakenliners, there's a couple of Drimmons milking as well. And there's a few other bits and pieces being introduced again this year. So that's roughly where we are.
Great, there's good diversity there. And Gail, tell me, how did you get involved? I'm sure you weren't dragged kicking and screaming onto this beautiful farm. So what's your background and how did you get involved in this farm?
Well, I suppose we only have an hour, so I'll keep bullet points. So I was born and brought up in Hong Kong until I was 15, and then myself, my sister, and my mother moved back to Ireland to the family farm. School, college, the rest of it, I then got involved with Mockra Farmer, which is where I met Bryan. So previously, I would have sort of growing up in Hong Kong, we had a good friend who had a small holding. So there was always ducklings in the bath and chicks and geese, sort of handering and, you know, breeding rabbits, breeding mice and all sorts of things. When we moved back to Ireland, we got into sheep by way of the next door neighbor who was a sheep farmer. We got a couple of pet lambs and we bred them up to, I think we got around to the stage of sort of 50, 55 at one stage, which was a complete disaster. Mum does the sheep. She breeds the sheep. She's bred them for their wool. So she processes the wool and hand dyes that. So then sort of growing up, I would have done free range geese and free range pigs then as well, saddleback for sort of pork and bacon. And then I joined Mockra and I met him. And now I'm a dairy farmer. I'm also lactose intolerant, which is full circle.
Oh well. That sounds really good. It sounds like there's a bit of partnership going on there. So Bryan, I know that you have kind of a whole background and Nuffield scholarship in clover. So you might just kickstart us on what this journey has been for you and how it's helped develop your farm.
Yeah, I suppose when I came back to farm in '99 and the year 2000, we were still under EU milk quota. And as the herd got better, we realized we were very extensively stocked and we were putting out fertilizer and growing an amount of silage and not using it. So started exploring the options of I suppose stumbled across clover by accident with Joggis and the work research they were doing in Solarhead. And by 2005, we were running the system nearly on the point of zero nitrogen input. Now, as I say, I've done all the right and wrong things with clover. I've made all the mistakes. I've gotten it right a few times. So over the last 20 odd years, I've had various levels of clover on the farm, depending on weather and stocking rates and everything. But I suppose about 2015, Gail and myself, we had a sit down after a very busy spring of what we wanted to do with the farm. And I suppose that's when we drew up our sustainability plan. And by saying sustainability, it meant that we were sustainable on the farm. We were overworked. We had very tight cash flow. There was a lot of cows on the farm. So we looked at
the new baby.
Yeah, new baby, Shannon, who's sitting behind the laptop at the moment. Yeah. So during that, part of it was that we wanted to ensure that we were doing the best what was right for the farm, ourselves, and for the environment around us. And clover was starting to come back into the system in terms that we were running all our heifer rearing blocks on zero nitrogen systems at the time, mainly because we were too busy to spread fertilizer, and it was a case of chancing it. Oh, the grass is still growing, we leave it alone, and the clover just kept them improving. And during that kind of talks, we said, right, let's reintroduce clover fully across the dairy platform. So that's what we're currently doing at the moment. I'm trying to gather information left, right, and center, and still trying to do it. Still have 2 papers on the office wall I need to go reading through. And did the Nutfield Scholarship 2 years ago, based on clover, trying to find what the best farmers are doing out there, and seeing how that can work and how can we exchange knowledge back out to other farmers so they might do the same as well. But the other thing that's coming in on clover then as well is because we're not using chemical nitrogen, we're reducing the levels of synthetic carbon-based products that we're using on the farm. So we're reducing our nitric oxide levels. So we're reducing our overall carbon footprint on the farm. So that's the extra payback on clover now within the modern agricultural scene.
So what are your biggest learnings from clover? You were saying kind of you had some kind of challenges as well. So if a farmer was starting out going, oh, you know, where do I start? Or what would your kind of biggest learnings that you have felt with your farm? I know every farm's different depending on, you know, your starting point and also your land type and stuff. But for you, what were your biggest learning curves?
The biggest things I've learned on clover is that it actually works on a broad range of stocking rates. So whether you're very extensively stocked or you're moderately stocked like we are, at the old language of a cow to the acre, um, if you have your soils right, if you have good soil fertility, good structure, good carbon base in them, you'll grow clover. And I often get the thing that's easy for me. I'm a Kilkenny farmer. I have the best ground in the country. We live 1,000 feet above sea level in an area that's known as Black Bog. So yeah, we've managed to get it to work on really good ground up here on the hill, on marginal ground on the Mar clays at the bottom of the farm, but also on some of the very good limestone ground we have down near the bottom, near Kilmagany village. So yeah, work on the soil type, work what suits it well. It likes a good pH, but there is clovers that will work on any system. So it's a case of dipping in your toe and just keep trying it.
So do you reseed it or yeah, or do you take it from your own farm and kind of, I don't know, to kind of do green hay, or how do you get it out?
Most of it's all been introduced through full reseeds. We've experimented with oversowing, and we've had very good success rates on probably 60 to 70% of our oversows. We're learning as we're doing, so getting good soil to seed contact as we're oversow. But what I've started to learn as well is that there is some of the more extensive and low input ground we have. So we have some very marginal ground. And when we run that at a suitable stocking rate under a zero nitrogen input, we actually have native clovers coming in, and we're getting to close to between 9 to 10 tons to the hectare off those, off old grasses, off native clovers. A bit of other legumes coming in, such as vetches and birdfoot truffle. So that's a new thing that I'm starting to look at in the last year and a half, is seeing what's the most we can push out of those older swarts at a commercial value that will benefit the farm.
And before I go back to Gail there, one last thing on the clover and stuff, how has it impacted your chemical inputs, your kind of, you were talking about at the start with your sustainability, like have you seen a massive improvement in terms of, I suppose, what you're putting into the land, what you need to put into the land?
Yeah, we do
Or
weekly,
decrease, yeah, sorry, when I say
we do
improvement.
weekly grass walks. So we're constantly monitoring and measuring and comparing across. But I suppose, unfortunately, I'm involved with a discussion group with James Humphrey, former of Solarhead as well, is that we're looking at the breakdown of the farm. So what we're spreading no nitrogen on with high levels of clover to the fields that are less than 5% clover that we're applying chemical nitrogen on. And the interesting thing for the last 3 years is that my highest performing fields are my zero nitrogen high clover content. So we're growing in excess of 20 ton to the hectare and getting 13 grazings a year off them with the milking cows. So we're able to get really high input with minimal, really high output of grass and grazings with minimal input of, or no input of chemical fertilizer. So
Yeah.
broadly across the farm, last year we spread about 100 kilos to the hectare, averaged across everything. We have gotten that down to a low of 74 kilos. Last year it was colder and wetter, so to grow enough feed for the farm, we had to go in with that little bit extra to make sure that we had enough feed for the farm itself, for the herd. This year, because it's been so warm and so mild, our clover contents are higher this year, so we're actually reducing and increasing the area of zero nitrogen paddocks across the farm at the moment. So we're constantly measuring, monitoring, and reacting to it.
Yeah, which you have to. I mean, if you think about the April, May we had last year compared to what we've, you know, the April we've had this year, it's been so different. So I can imagine that it's just complete. You have to kind of look at what's going on in your own farm. So Gail, coming back to the sustainability plan, what was the biggest highlight and change for you that was important for you on the farm to focus on?
And I think sort of a lot of the sustainability that we sort of looked at it was as a whole, as a family, how we could continue this to work without sort of, as I said, we had a new baby, and we recently, there was a partnership which had dissolved. So Bryan was working single-handedly from sort of 5 o'clock in the morning until sort of 11 o'clock at night. I had a newborn, which I didn't know the top end from the bottom end. So it was a case of we can't continue this. So it's a case of what can we put into place to make our lives sort of worth living, as it were, because you don't get extra points for hardship. So sort of then we sort of looked at ways of sort of reducing labor, and I think we lean management everything, and we're constantly looking at ways we can improve things, looking at sort of ways we can reduce labor, looking at ways, not even sort of, if it's difficult, can we make it easier? You know, we surely aren't the only people in the entire world that have these issues. It's like little stupid things that when we're building a new shed, that the shed needs to be able to be opened and closed by a one-handed woman. You know, none of this lifting and tugging, and you know, when you have to step on them, when you have to lift them. Yeah, so we try to do that. Now, that's not saying that all of the sheds are like that.
Yeah.
We're still working on it. It's an ongoing.
So do you guys milk twice a day, and is it a one-person job when you do it, or does it have to
so
be
when we
two-person?
installed the rotary, we were conscious. We used to have a herringbone, which was, you could do a one person, but really you sort of needed two people. So when we were doing the rotary, it was a case of, we've gone to, like, if we're going to invest all of this money, there's no point in having to have 2 or 3 people. So it's a one-person rotary. Like now, during certain times, sort of during the spring or breeding or whatever, you would have a second person for different bits and pieces of it. But usually it's a one-person rotary that is sort of simply set up that really anyone can go in and do it.
Yeah. And are you calving by like by bull or by AI? I mean, do you kind of narrow it down to it? Like, is it all done within a month, or how's your calving work?
And not quite a month. It's on. It's the aim. Yeah, we work on all the KPIs set out by Teagasc, and like even Gail was at one of our discussion groups today, looking at how to improve farm efficiency again. So we'll calve 90 to 95% of our cows within 6 weeks. Last year we only bred the cows for 8 weeks altogether. So that calves, we had a few calved early and a few calved late, but we calved all the entire herd in 9.5 weeks. I think we were averaging about 12.5 a day for the first 4 or 5 weeks. So
usually the front half.
yes. So and we do it that way because we're calving the herd to meet when the farm will actually start growing the most amount of grass. And because it's an elevated farm, we're very cold in the spring, so we calve slightly later into February. So we won't start calving until probably the 5th to the 7th of February. And then we want them all calved as quick as possible. So when the growth takes off in early May, all our cows are capable of taking in their full intake of grazed grass outside. So we don't have to put in silage. We don't have to put in bought-in concentrate. We can solely work on what the farm is really good at, and that's growing grass and clover. So that's the aim. It's all AI, predominantly AI. We're pedigree Frisian herds, so we've been fortunate. We've sent bulls to stud. We have some very good bloodlines out there, and that's one of the other things that's in the farm. We're trying to breed a cow that is going to be right for 10 to 15 years time. So when I came home first, there was a slight underlying issue of fertility creeping into the herd. There was a cell count issue as well in terms of the level of red blood cells within the milk in terms of identifying infections. So we took the approach then that we wouldn't breed the problem cows. We'd only breed the cows that were healthy and best suited to the system. So as a result,
Mhm.
now we've bred up quite a very good, efficient herd that's able to produce high quality milk of grazed grass with minimal input or intervention. So that's what we're trying to do on the cow front.
So you'd have like quite a relatively low like somatic cell count.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
yeah, brilliant.
So yeah, we've picked up a few cell check awards in the time. We're running currently around 7% of cows treated for other issues. The ideal thing is to get that below 3%. We do a lot of selective dry cow. So we're constantly monitoring all those inputs going in on the herd as well, trying to identify the cows are best suited to breed the heifers from.
Yeah, I remember when we met you in at the awards back in the Burren last autumn. You guys were talking about how you also were working on the feeds that you were giving your cows. That you've been working with Tirlán, was it, on changing what type of feed was coming into onto your farm and where it was coming from? Can you explain that to us and how
Yeah,
that worked out?
yeah, there was two kind of approaches to that. Because we're a grass-based farm, the best feed we have is what we can grow outside. And then what really sparked the discussion on what ingredients come into the feed themselves. Gail and myself were in New Zealand in 2014 with our discussion group. And as we flew from New Zealand back home to Ireland, we flew into Kuala Lumpur and we saw the rainforest being taken down for palm kernel, for palm oil. And we'd spent two.
Well, we presumed they were. We don't know.
Uh, we had lines of palm trees, and we spent 3 weeks of two different messages coming in. So we decided that we didn't want to be part of that. We didn't want to be one reason why palm kernel extract was being imported into Ireland to feed Irish at the time, to see could we get feeds without palm kernel extract. And over times now we've slowly brought that down. That now we want to feed our cows. The big goal is to feed it entirely of grass and Irish grown grains. We started a conversation with Tirlán about a year and a half ago, and we managed to get them to provide us a concentrated meal that is zero palm kernel and zero soya. So trying to reduce the carbon footprint and the area required to feed our cows. Long term, we'd like to get that down to European product only, ideally Irish grains and probably byproduct feeds out of Europe. And in time, probably just get it down to Irish grains. So we generally feed only about 400 kilos per cow per year. That's the target. Weather naturally changes that. Our highest levels of feed was about 890 kilos. Our lowest level of feeding in a year was 54 kilos. But we want to have a minimal effect of what our farm is doing on the world stage. So that's what we're
Brilliant.
trying to do. We have
Guest appearances here. Tell me your grazing strategy. How you were saying that you sometimes have, you graze 13 times or whatever. Can you just tell us your grazing strategy for your fields? What's that look like, and how does that work for you?
Yeah, on the milking herd side, we generally graze from the first week of February right up until mid-December. We graze slightly later than most dairy farms, and that's because of the clover. We want to get covers down so we can get light down to the clover plants during winter. But as soon as the cows start calving, they get access to grass. Everything else depends how much they go out. But generally, it's torrential rain or snow cover is the only thing that will stop us from grazing. And we measure the grass, and as soon as we get cover sufficient in different paddocks, the cows go into graze it. When we get surpluses, we go in and take that as silage, either for high quality feed for the milking cows or dry cow feed for the winter months. But pretty much we're same, like I said earlier, we're measuring, seeing what we're growing, and then getting the herd out to graze it. On average, we graze every paddock 10.5 times a year. And that's not because we're trying to just take as much as we can. That's because our farm is capable of growing that level of grass to that is to get the cows out to graze it. They're taking in the feed themselves and they're putting their own dung back on the paddock. And it's a very sustainable system, and it's worked really well over the last years. And there's probably a little bit more scope in it yet, and that's what we're trying to do with the clover now. So yeah. On the heifer side, on the replacement heifers, allows us, but it's up to weather and growth rates where the heifers are out.
Okay, interesting. We'll go on to some questions here that we have from the crowd. Actually, before we do this, just one last question I want to ask you about. You know, obviously we've had very hot weather and dry weather the last few weeks. How has that affected, you know, it's very easy to go by the book and by the diary, but obviously certain things happen and weather changes and stuff. How has it affected your particular farm, or do you feel quite resilient against maybe these kind of climatic changes at this time of the year, or what's that look like for you?
Yeah, I suppose within that sustainability plan that Gail and myself discussed earlier, we always had that the farm is able to cope with anything that comes at it. So this spring has been an absolute pleasure up here. Bar the snow back in January, but lucky enough we didn't have cows milking, so we were actually able to enjoy it. But this year has been an absolute pleasure. The soils are warming up. The dry weather's actually helped us on our clay ground. That's actually allowed it to crack, that we're getting good aeration, natural aeration down through the soils. Growth is probably just a little bit below average for a 10-year curve, but we are still feeding the cows pretty much fully on grazed grass. They're just getting a small bit of meal just to entice them into the parlour. But 3 weeks ago, when I knew we were going to get a prolonged drier spell, I deliberately started to get the rotation set at roughly about 22 days, that we were leaving a small bit behind in the paddock, that if we did go into a drought, we had an extra round of feed left on the fields that we could start taking it down again further. A bit like the old 1980s New Zealand really resilient dairy farmers used to do on grass before they got complicated with all the inputs, was that we go out, we graze the farm, we set the rotation, we look at what the cows are grazing, and we look at what they're leaving behind. So we were very comfortable the last couple of weeks. We had a little bit of rain tonight, so I'm looking forward to growth taking off in the next week.
This is growing its silage.
Yeah, and I presume you haven't got to the stage where water has become an, you know, you're high enough up that it's not a drought stage or anything.
Yeah. We'd get a higher rainfall than pretty much most of Kilkenny. We'd average somewhere between, I suppose, over the last 15, we average rainfall about 1,250 mil. Kilkenny City would be down around 900 mil. So we're quite comfortable up here. We've only ever really once had a drought, and that was in 2018. And we went into it late and we came out of it very early compared to all the farmers in the valleys down below us. But yeah, we're quite resilient that way. Too much rain is our problem because of our soil types, but we have the infrastructure set up in the farm in terms of access, roadways and water trucks, that we can still get out and get those grazings done.
Okay, fair enough. We'll just go to some questions here. Rachel Crichton has asked, have you had any bloat issues with the cows from clover? Do you stitch in or do you completely reseed? She has some other questions here, but we'll just start with that. Have you had any bloat issues with the cows from clover?
Up to a year ago, I would have said no. And then I had a bad run last year. We lost 4 cows with bloat. But it was my own fault. I just wasn't quick enough on the game in terms of, I knew they were going into very leafy grasses. Actually, 2 of the bloat cases happened in swarts that had very little clover. It was actually the leafy grass that done the damage. But some of the stuff I've learned on my New Zealand or my nut field studies in Tasmania, I found a system that we can dispense bloat oil to the cows as we milk them in very accurate levels. And that worked a real treat. Once we got that going, the bloat disappeared. But generally, because our cows are reared on clover as calves and heifers into cows, we seem to have a bigger resilience to it. It was just last year with the flush of spring growth when we got that problem. But now we have a system that we can accurately put in bloat oil to mitigate that problem.
Interesting. Do you stitch in or do you completely reseed? Do you use red clover, and any issues with clover overtaking grass?
Um, in terms of establishing, it depends on the field. If we have a really high performing field that has got good tons to the hectare, but slightly low on clover, what we generally try to do is stitch in there. But what we'll do is we'll target it after a grazing. So coming through April or May, if we get a bit of wet weather, we'll put the cows in on those fields so they just mark it a little bit more with their hooves, and then we go straight in and we use a Guttler Greenmaster drill to broadcast the seed and roll it in. Most of the clover is done through full reseeds, but the establishment can be an easy part once you get the soil contact right. It's the management afterward that ensures that the clover is there in the future. On the red clover, we use both red and white in our grazing mixes. We started that 3 years ago. We have been using just red clover in silage ground since 2013. That's working really well where we get established well. Sorry, what the rest?
Any issues with it taking over grass? Can you hear me? Sorry. Any issues with clover taking over grass? Yeah.
Not really. Even in August, September, when we're running 50% plus clover on swarts, particularly on the heifer ground, it really takes over. And it just works well. If it gets too strong and we get into the winter, we do end up with very low covers through the winter, but that's part of the system. It just means that the next spring might be a week later turnout or something like that. But we're quite happy to let the clover do what it does every year. So.
Okay, perfect. We have a few more clover questions, but I might just come to Gail. Gail, you can see if Sean Kelly's asked, how could you become carbon neutral? Any suggestions on that?
I think we're always looking at different ways of becoming carbon neutral. I think sort of in Ireland, it's very difficult with the whole sequestering element that is there. So there's a lot of confusion with that about who owns carbon and that type of thing. The analysis from what I've been researching anyway, you know, the likes of Australia, which is planning to be carbon neutral by 2030, you know, and then you sort of look at their fields and you look at our fields and you sort of wonder, sort of from a farm point of view, I suppose, sort of reducing sort of the inputs of the soya and things, if you can get that to a more localized base, so your carbon footprint to get things onto the farm is lower. We've got the likes of solar panels. We sort of everything is as energy efficient at it. Our new calf buyer is 2 kilometers down the road, so that's also very good. So yeah, no, we are constantly looking at it, but I don't know how realistic claim that you are carbon neutral. I know there's been studies done up. My discussion group had a tour up in
Dose.
Yeah. So you see, they have the research to back it, and they have the thing. So that has to come down to a farm level that we're able to do that and understand the technology, because at the minute it's the scientists that sort of have all of that. So we don't know what we can claim, can't claim. So yeah, it's a case of it's going to have to come from a bigger organization to sort of be able to see what we are actually sequestering with what we have, so then we can work towards getting it better. So yeah, sorry, didn't answer your question, Sean. Sorry about that.
I mean, it's a tricky one as well. Sorry,
we're trying our best.
What we are doing is that we're controlling what we have control of on the farm. So we're reducing our chemical nitrogen. We're watching our electricity usage. We're trying to reduce everything that comes into the farm and be sustainable. Until we get into the point of measuring sequestration and everything else, I don't think we can do much more.
They plant trees like there's no tomorrow. There's a pocket tree there.
We even chanced one yesterday.
We'll actually come to that. I know that's some of my questions in a minute. But Nigel Gillis has asked any issues with scolotonia. He says I can't spell it, and I actually can't say it. So with the clover, and is the clover persistent? How many years between reseeds?
I'm making a guess. Nigel is talking about the build-up of pests, particularly eelworms in grass or in clover swarts, particularly. Has been an issue particularly in the UK with red clover. We haven't had any pests or fungal attacks on our clover that has affected the field's output. I think the fact that we're on proper rotational grazing, that the field is being grazed quickly and then it gets a chance to rest. We are chancing it a bit with the red clover that we have it in and established so long. We oversow it every 4 years. The fact that we're a one pocket farm with nobody else around us growing clover, I think that is saving us from the likes of the eelworm and stem worms and stuff, that we don't have that issue building up in the soils. There's no potato farmers near us. There's nobody really running clover swarts like we are. So we're probably a little bit more remote and removed from those pests getting onto the farm. So yeah, we've been lucky that way. Sorry, second part of the question?
How many years between reseeds?
My oldest reseed that I first done is up in the Moonteen. That's one of our fields. That was reseeded in, I think, 2001. Last year it grew just shy of 16 tons to the hectare. So going on its performance, it needs no need to go in reseeding yet. It's well over the national average. It's could do it a little bit more clover. We could maybe oversow it next spring. We'll see how opportunities open up on that one. But if the field is performing, we'll leave it alone. So.
Okay. This question, it actually came straight to me, but it's for you. But Rachel Carton's asked, I had a look at the feed you're using from Tier Lawn, and I'm interested in using it also at 12% protein. Do you notice any difference in production? It has high sugar beet content, so I assume energy is quite high. Also, would you use this in the winter months?
Yeah, because we are so grass focused, we don't need to import protein onto the farm because we have it outside in terms of grass and clover. So the only thing our cows really need coming from calving towards midsummer is energy to keep body condition on them. And that's what that feed does very well. It's not a feed suitable for winter months in terms of if we're on a high silage diet, we mightn't have enough protein in that nut itself. So we do get a 16% specially made as well. We don't focus on production per cow. As we said, we want to breed the cow that we are going to have in 20 years' time. So we've set the system. So we know we don't want to feed more than 400 kilos in a year. So we will not up the meal feeding as we approach the end of the season and start housing, because we're setting the base level of what the cow should work on. So we're trying to identify the genetics that are going to identify those heifers that we need in the future. So we've set the system now, and every cow has to conform to that. If she doesn't perform, she's not bred for replacement. She gets Aberdeen Angus. That's the way we run it.
Interesting. So just Sean Kelly's asked, what species of grass do you grow and what chemicals do you use, if you want to share
that? We grass seed in terms of the varieties of the products, we've used them all. If it's up there on the recommended list between the Department of Agriculture and Teagasc on the PPI, so the pasture profit index, we're using those. So we're looking at what complements the farm right. So we're trying to get good ground cover. We're trying to get an even spread of growth from spring to autumn, but we're trying to get our plant that's going to persist within the sward. We do dabble with other stuff, so we do have some hybrids in on the farm, and we also use Italian ryegrasses in on our silage grass, our silage swarts with the red clover. So we do use quite a variation. I suppose maybe I'm just a little bit over eccentric. I like going up and down through lists and trying new stuff. We do experiment with other stuff. We've experimented with introducing oats into our reseeds to suck up free nitrogen from the the decaying sward. We've looked at increasing or using sand foil. We have some fields last year we've used plantain in. So we're trying a bit of everything, but generally if it's on a recommended list by the Department of Agriculture, we're kind of happy to use it.
Very good.
That's Toby.
How's it going? So I know that in the film you kind of sorry if anyone hasn't seen it, Gail and Bryan have a film, a 5-minute film that came out about their farm on our Farming for Nature YouTube site.
We haven't seen it.
Oh, you haven't seen it? Oh, it's really nice. And it's lovely to see your farm. But in it, you kind of have kind of an evolving woodland. You were saying growing up, obviously, that there was a lot of kind of hedgerows and groves and places to play and whatever. But how important is it for your cows and just your farming system in general to have these kind of areas of, you know, hedgerows or groves or whatever?
Yeah, suppose the history of the farm. My grandfather was always interested in nature along with his brothers, and that shows on the farm. My great grandfather would have been an advocate of it as well in terms of hedge laying. So that we've always had reasonably good cover on the farm, but the real tree planting started during the economic war. My father tells the story of his father that he couldn't find timber either to burn or build anything with, and if he could find it, he couldn't afford it. So his approach was if he planted trees, he'd have shelter for the cattle, and his grandchildren would have timber. So as a result, that has always been led on. So there was a lot of Sitka spruce planted back in the 1930s and 40s, and I know it has a bad name, but because it's slow growing, it makes beautiful timber. When I'm not milking cows, I play with timber. I actually have a sawmill on the farm as well. So that timber is being used as my grandfather intended. But my father planted a lot of white thorn underneath those to get hedgerows established. I plant everything and anything. So if it's native species, I'm generally planting it. So a lot of white thorn gone in. Blackthorn doesn't seem to suit the farm too well, but we have holly on the farm as well, which seems to work. Planting a good bit of oak because oak was very scarce up here on the hill. It won't grow commercial timber, but it's a native species. We're planting older native variety of Scots pine. So I have some larch planted as well to provide timber again, workable timber in the future. So there's a bit of everything going on, but it does help the farm in terms of because we're elevated, it slows down the wind. It provides shelter to cattle, but also on a day like it was a Sunday evening, I went up to move the heifers on Quinn's Hill, up at the very top, and really hot day, and all the heifers were shaded under two whitethorn bushes, and I sat down with them and we admired the view, and I had to chat, and then I came off home. So it's good mentally as well. Gail was probably wondering why.
Yes, it's great mentally when you're dealing with 3 children inside the house.
There he is, off with the fairies.
Yeah.
Which is great. Tell me, Gail, I think, did I hear that you do a lot of crafting as well on the farm with the wood, or was
No,
that...
I don't. I actually set up a little sideline there. I started I started making soap using the cow's milk. So it started, Shannon, our eldest, has eczema. So it started as a way of looking for a chemical-free way of treating the eczema. So it was all sort of during lockdown, and I sort of played around with different recipes, and we went through the whole safety assessments and packaging and building websites and getting a bit carried away. And so so I do that when I'm not doing everything else. So we're chipping away at it, and it's going really well now. I've just got another wholesale shop up in Dublin. So we're sort of branching out now that the kids are getting a bit older. It's sort of that they're in school.
Yeah.
You can actually do stuff.
And do you make
So,
it off any products from the farm, or is it just you
yeah,
just make it on the farm?
So the milk is the sort of the main ingredient in it. Then I'd also there's the gardener. I'd use carrot juice, which would be the Iberic produce, the carrots that aren't pretty enough to go into your packet of carrots. I get honey from Brian's uncle, which is 5 kilometers down the road. I've got a nettle variety, which myself and the kids get from the back of the garden. We dehydrate it in the oven sort of overnight and then grind it into a powder. So that's got great sort of anti-inflammatory qualities in it. So yeah, we just sort of played around with a few ideas, got the safety assessments, and yeah, went a bit
Brilliant.
mad.
And what's it called? What's the soap called?
So it's Bobar soap.
Great, excellent.
So I'm on
Excellent.
Instagram and Facebook. Have my website available
Brilliant.
in a shop near you soon.
Excellent. We look forward to it. Has it improved the eczema? Has it helped with that?
Yeah, it's great, because it's got no chemicals in it. It's sort of the base would be sort of the milk would be very skin conditioning. It doesn't have any chemicals that would react to it. Now, a lot of kids would have eczema and they'd grow out of it. With Shannon, she still has it. She'd be affected if she goes near a swimming pool, or say like the last couple of weeks, the heat would sort of irritate. With eczema, you get that sort of the red anger, as you call it. So the soap just takes the anger out of it and just soothes it. So we've had great compliments from, you know, everyone from farmers to teachers and all types of people that would have different skin conditions.
I love it. It looks like a cow. It's great.
Looking for a commission.
Little skinny cow. So I mean, you obviously have a very keen interest in nature, both of you. And you have the next generation coming up, as we can see there in the background. How does this affect the way you farm?
I suppose it goes back to the old saying that you never own the land, you're only looking after for the next generation. But some of the stuff, because we're on the farm and we live in the farm, the kids, as I did, they wander around, they end up in the groves and they end up in the streams, and even going down checking the cattle, and we see either the hares running out, or we see a buzzard or a sparrowhawk, or even the small stuff like admiring the primroses coming out in the lane. So it's all those little things as we go. And even last weekend, we went up to check the heifers, and we brought the barbecue, and we had our Sunday dinner outside. So beef that was grown on the farm, we brought our salads and stuff with us. And as Gail was cooking them, myself and the kids moved the heifers. So we're submersed around it, and it's hard not to appreciate it when you're growing up around with it. So yeah, it's everyday life, I suppose, is that we're just in contact with it.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant. And is there have you had many challenges along the way moving? I suppose one of the questions here, and then I'll move on to my question. Have you reduced yield? Sean Kelly has asked, are you more reduced yield than a conventional farmer, or where do you stand in terms of your sustainability, I suppose, for your pocket?
Yeah, I suppose, and it's your last point. It's probably the most relevant. We're making a living from the farm. If we're not making a living from the farm, we're not going to be here to look after it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's a business, so it needs to be able to support us. If it's not doing that, then you sort of have to look for something else, really.
And there's no doubt, if we went down a more conventional system and fed higher levels of meal, the cows will definitely respond to it. But as I said, we've set the system for the herd and the direction we want to bring those cows. So the last 2 years, yield has been depressed because between weather and also me going off and doing an Nutfield scholarship, not being around to instantly react to little things.
He's blaming me for the extra meals. I was trying to ask him whether there's enough grass on the field, and he was in Borneo.
Okay, kind of fair enough.
On a normal year, we generally sell about 460 to 470 kilos of milk solids, which is well above the national average in terms of milk output. And then it's down to our management on the farm in terms of cost control, and particularly because we're not spending, the clover's probably saving us the guts of probably somewhere in the region of about 40,000 euros of nitrogen. So that is extra profit here. So instead of having to...
But it's also extra profit that you're not paying for someone to spread that. You're not paying for the diesel. You're not paying for the person to be on a tractor. You're not paying for the tractor to break down. You're not paying for the person to drive in and get a part for the tractor. There's like all little build up with it.
So
Yeah.
we've set the system and we are getting good output out of the farm. There's more of it in the system, but as we get better at managing the clover and reacting that little bit quicker, we're going to be more profitable. We probably won't increase milk yields, but we will be better off lifestyle and profitability from it.
Yeah, interesting. What have been your main challenges along the way?
Time. I've been very fortunate. Role at a very early age. There's been few things along the lines in terms of be it a TB outbreak or various things coming along. Like we put a lot of investment in on the farm. We've doubled the size of the farmyard. We've invested in soil fertility. We put in 3 underpasses. We put in the rotary. So there's been a lot of money going in that way. The heavy lifting, touch wood, is hopefully done. So now the whole system is just settling down and bedding down. But there's been really no challenges, and I suppose we enjoy that.
I suppose, well, the first 5 years that I was down here, we were in TB restriction, and it was coming into, it was 2011, so 2012. I think he was milking 120. He was increasing the herd to 160 and then restricted with TB, so he calved in 198. I remember very specifically because I was in charge of calves then. And so like the system was just, it was not, it couldn't hold it.
It was
there
creaking,
was just like mayhem, and there was calves in every available space. So sort of every year we've sort of dealt with things, and from there we've been trying to future-proof things then as well. So we're constantly looking at sort of the different regulations that might be coming down the way. If that does come in, how can we future-proof ourselves and the farm to react to that quickly?
I suppose on that, like we are always trying to preempt those things, and I suppose that's been lucky from our involvement in Mocker and the firm. Gail ended up on executive and was national secretary. I ended up as vice chair of Ag Affairs, and part of my role, I was in Europe, in Brussels, and I was seeing stuff that was coming at us in the future. So we adopted low emission slurry spreading before it was compulsory. We bought a slurry tanker and with a trailing shoe system on it, and the people in the garage couldn't understand why we wanted to do this. And we were explaining we were going for the efficiencies of the nitrogen in the slurry. But one of the things we done last year, the whole thing of calf welfare and the nitrates and everything, we actually ended up starting to roof our silage pits. Because we were looking, if we had to hold on to our calves for an extra period of time, we were going to be short on space for calves. So we roofed the silage pits. First of all, that we weren't catching rainwater that was going into the slurry tanks. And then secondly, the puppy's after grabbing the lead of the laptop. We didn't preempt that one.
Chew, chew, chew. There goes the laptop.
So now we have roofs over our silage pits that we have more slurry storage as a result of it, but we also have these big sheds that when pressure comes under on the calving season, we have these big sheds we can put calves into, bed them down, and everything is there. So we're preempting all those things. That's Eli.
Hi, Eli. How's it going? That sounds that's really interesting. That it kind of leads on to my next question, which you've kind of half answered, is, I mean, where did you go to get support and advice along the way? And I think what's really obviously one advantage you guys have is that you are a partnership, so you have someone to bounce ideas off, and is also day to day on the farm, seeing the same challenges as each other. But in general, outside of your farm gate, where do you go for support and advice?
Yeah, I suppose, like you said, the biggest asset we have is that we're a team. But we've been very good. Joggers has been a huge help to us. But we've been very lucky. We've had very good advisors, but between discussion groups as well, we've had direct access to specialized advisors in terms of George Ramsbottom and Patrick Going, but also access into research farms such as Solihead, Ballyhays, and particularly Moorcock. So if I had a question in the morning, I could get onto the lads onto the phone, and within a few hours have that information. Whatever they can't get for us in terms of being slightly different with clover or slurry usage, between Google research out of New Zealand or off the continent in terms of the dairyman research, but also the network I've built up within Nutfield Ireland is that I could send a WhatsApp and somebody would have some contact to somebody around the world that we can get this information from. So we've been lucky. We've had great contact with great people, and that's built up that information we can source.
Brilliant. And I mean, what memory, like just bringing it back finally to the kind of the nature area, what memory do you have in your brain that you're like, this is working not just for us and our livelihoods, but it's also working for, future, I suppose, generations and for nature, for wildlife? Is there anything that stands out to you from your farm?
What's really stood out in the last 2 years is I'd be bringing in the cows or doing herding and suddenly realize that's a plant that I've either haven't noticed before or has been reintroduced or come back naturally onto the farm. I'm not too sure which, but we are seeing more plants, more insects, and more wildlife on the farm than ever before. And my father joined reps in '97. I remember the discussion he had with the Joggers advisor at the time. He was one of the first dairy farmers in Kilkenny to go into reps. So we've always been doing our bit in fencing watercourses and fencing off those corners of the fields that were less workable. But in the last 2 years, I've definitely seen that level of increase in terms of the biodiversity that's around the farm. And I'm not too sure, is it because of what we're doing or is I'm just paying more attention? But there is definitely more than what I've noticed in the past.
How about you, Gail? What's your big kind of standout?
Yeah, well, I suppose I've always been a bit sort of away with the berries at best. But yeah, no, I think it's really sort of it's a case of when you can't find a couple of the children and then you realize that their bikes are down by sort of one of the little groves. Sort of we've got two sort of main groves that are in walking distance, and they each have a little pallet house, and sort of a bit of a stream that runs when it does, and it doesn't depending on the weather. It's not deep or anything, it's just a bit of a stream, and it's just a case of this, the kids are out and enjoying nature, and it's a case of, well, that's what it's really about. It's a case of like having the pockets where you can sort of explore your imagination, and it's just sort of enjoying nature. You don't have these big plains with no pockets of fun. Like even sort of going in sort of during the autumn and like seeing the different funguses growing and the different sort of growths of mosses. There's all different types of mosses, and it's just such a lovely environment to be in. Like I really enjoy it, and I think the kids really enjoy it as well.
Yeah.
Actually, one thing that I find nice to watch is when Gail and the kids go off for a walk to pick wild strawberries along the banks of the underpass and stuff. And just passing by with the tractor, and here they all are, off happy as anything, gathering up strawberries and fighting over blackcurrants and things.
Wait until Toby puts them into his pocket and
squashes them in. Nice. Listen, guys, that's great. It's been a really interesting hour. I don't think we've kind of even scratched the surface on half the stuff that you're doing on your farm, but it just sounds like a gorgeous farm. I know that you guys are having a walk for us in September, isn't it?
That's correct.
Yeah, so if anyone's interested in seeing their farm, to sign up to the walk on our farmingfornature.ie. You'll find the walk series up there under events. We have a number of walks across all our farms. If anyone has also a farm that they'd like some advice on, we have a mentorship program as well, whereby we can send farmers out onto your farm and give you advice on, where you can get started on your farm towards nature. So feel free to look that up on our website as well. We have another Q&A on the 3rd Tuesday of next month, yet to be decided who it is, but do sign up and we look forward to seeing you then. Meanwhile, thank you so much, Bryan and Gail. It's been an honor chatting to you, and hopefully I'll be able to visit your farm in a few months' time. Oh, and Toby and Isla and Shannon and the dog for his contribution in chewing your lead. And it's good to have the full gang around. So thanks very much, guys, and thanks for taking the time. We'll chat to you soon. Right.